On this edition of Great Lakes Now, positive signs for fish in the Chicago River.
I was hoping to find anything at these islands, so that was really exciting to see.
Taking in the Great Lakes region's incredible night sky.
One of the best places in the lower 48 to see the aurora.
And U.S. and Canadian parks deal with the pandemic and high water.
Park staff told me they had to turn away 2,000 vehicles, and you could see them lining Highway 6.
This program is brought to you by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Lori and Tim Wadhams.
The Consumers Energy Foundation is committed to serving Michigan, from preserving our state's natural resources and sustaining our future, to continuing business growth, academic achievement, and community involvement. Learn more at consumersenergy.com/foundation.
The Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at DPTV, the Polk Family Fund, Eve and Jerry Young, the Americana Foundation, the Brookby Foundation, Founders Brewing Company, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ward Detweiler. Welcome back to Great Lakes Now. In September of 2019, we told you about an interesting project that placed floating gardens in the Chicago River. At the time, nobody knew what effect this would have on the fish population, but now there are some encouraging findings, so we bring you this update.
Throughout the world, most cities have gone through a process of widening, straightening, dredging their rivers to create this sort of shipping system. And, the process of that was at the detriment to the wildlife that was originally there. So one of the real big missions of this is to create a model for how you would build an ecosystem in a river within a densely populated urban area.
Nick Wesley is one of the co-founders of Urban Rivers, the group that is working to create Wild Mile, a mile-long floating eco-park within the Chicago River.
Urban waterways have had a lot of different abuse over the years. The Chicago River, for one, was reversed, basically to move sewage instead of in Lake Michigan to other areas down south and in the Gulf of Mexico. And so with this history and this legacy of pollution and mistreatment, the Wild Mile kind of creates this new space where the focus is the habitat, the wildlife, the health of the river in general.
One of the most innovative features of the Wild Mile is a series of floating garden islands.
So I'm on the floating garden that we just installed, and you can see a lot of these plants, which were planted about 2 weeks ago, are really just starting to come in. We use these floating garden modules to do a few things. One is to create habitat for the areas around it, and it does it by having plants that grow directly through the system and having the roots freely suspended within the river. It creates habitat for fish and other wildlife. It also creates a space for birds and insects to kind of congregate, really create this ecosystem within it.
The first islands were installed in 2017. That year, 60 floating gardens were put in place. This summer, an additional 170 were added along the river. The Wild Mile is intended to both strengthen the community's connection to the river and host scientific research into the river's ecology. The goal is to create an environment for habitat as well as new opportunities for recreation and education.
Welcome to Kayak for Conservation.
Shedd Aquarium has been getting people in the community involved in river restoration through a program called Kayak for Conservation. Volunteers have been collecting data along the river since 2018. Jackie Meidoff is the manager of conservation stewardship for the Shedd Aquarium.
The kayak program is meant to get people out here on the Chicago River and experience it firsthand. We have different types of programs to meet people at their comfort levels. So sometimes that's just a tour where they're coming out and learning, and other times that's coming out and getting their hands dirty and giving back to the river. So that could be anything from litter monitoring to wildlife monitoring, anything from fish to waterfowl to turtles. And that helps give us a baseline for where wildlife is in the canal and how they're using the space as we continue to build out the canal with islands.
Yeah, if we get a little farther down, there's definitely turtles.
The connection to the river is so important because in order to continue improving the Chicago River, we need people who care for it. And in order to have people who care for it, they need to have a relationship with it in the first place. The most rewarding part of this program for me is seeing the change in people and their feelings about the Chicago River from before and after being out on the river. So a lot of times people come and they have not so good opinions about the Chicago River, and they leave and are just amazed at the things that they saw out there.
Data collected by volunteers is helping scientists like Austin Happel, a research biologist with Chicago's Shedd Aquarium, who is working to identify the impact the islands have on the river's fish population.
So in a lot of urban areas, rivers have been channelized, which means the sides of them have been dug straight down and the bottom of the river has been kind of scoured flat. And when that happens, there's no habitat for fish. Fish love structure and love hiding around things. They'll usually spawn on structures. But when rivers are channelized like that, there's nothing really there for them. These artificial floating wetlands kind of add additional aspects to those in that they're roots that are hanging down from the surface of the water. And so roots can suck up nutrients, they can help with adding oxygen to the waterway, they can allow invertebrates to live within the roots, and then fish can hide not only amongst them but around them and spawn within those roots.
Much of Austin's research is done at night. He collects fish and data to try and determine if fish are using the floating islands.
One thing I'm really interested in is if fish are using them as spawning habitat. So throughout the summer, I go out there and place larval light traps, which are a means of collecting larval fish, which are baby fish that aren't great at swimming quite yet, but they seem to be attracted into these light traps. And then we can use that to assess our fish spawning near these islands more than they are other structures or other parts of the river.
Back at Shedd Aquarium, Austin analyzes the larval fish he collected on the islands.
Over here we have fish caught in late August, set up in our microscope so that we can look at it and try to identify what it is. We also have a scale under the microscope, and that scale is used to get measurements of how big that fish is.
Austin discovered that a variety of native species were using the floating habitats. And many more species than he expected were calling the islands home.
These are some species that we identified using both the camera and using genetic ID. Species I expected to find were the common carp and the goldfish and the fathead minnow. Ones I was kind of surprised at finding were things like this white sucker and these golden shiner and spotfin shiners. These are native species, and it's really cool to see them in that part of the river. I was hoping to find anything at these islands, and so it was really great to be able to find 10 species spawning in that area, and a lot of them being native species. So that was really exciting to see.
Austin's research could indicate that more islands in the river may mean more fish.
This year, they're even adding more islands, so they're expanding the surface area that these wetlands take up. And so hopefully that means even more space for fish to hang out under and spawn on. And I'm interested in trying to see if we start seeing more and more of that happening.
The river is changing from its primary need being a waste dispersion method to actually being something of a ecological asset for the people around it. So I think we're getting close to the day where people will assume that a river has always been this ecological bounty within their city, instead of what it is now, where it's kind of an afterthought. And that future, I think, is soon.
For more coverage of efforts to restore rivers around our region, visit greatlakesnow.org. On a clear night, the Great Lakes provide an amazing view of the stars, making our region a great place to see or even photograph the Milky Way or the Northern Lights.
My photography and cinematography is Lake Superior region based, inspired, and I've been at this for about 20 years.
Sean Malone is a photographer in Marquette, Michigan, and she's been photographing the night sky since 1998.
When I started out photography, just regular landscape photography, I was using film cameras, negative film or slide film. You would have to wait until you get the film back to see what you got. So when I got the film back, it was like, wow, I was just amazed. And then like a once in 11 year event happened in 2004. It was an aurora that was in every direction, every color. And I shot 2 whole rolls of slide film that night.
And when digital cameras became capable of capturing low-light scenes, Sean began shooting night sky time lapses, often featuring the Northern Lights.
And then I just really started learning all about space weather data and that kind of thing in order to try to put myself in the right position at the right time in order to be able to capture the aurora. You really have to scout out your own undiscovered locations where you are not going to have like a car light ruin your shot, you know, and if you plan a 3-hour shot for a time lapse, that's something that can be an issue. Here in Marquette County, where I'm at, we have a tremendous amount of public access to Lake Superior. And that allows people a chance to get to a dark sky location facing north over Lake Superior. That provides me just geographically the ability to look directly over Lake Superior and see a completely dark night sky facing north, directly north. And then I have a field of view that is 180 degrees to the east and west that has no obstruction. So that's half of the battle in seeing the aurora. And then number 2 is getting rid of the obstructions and then being north enough in order to be able to catch the display. So this is one of the best places in the lower 48 to see the aurora.
Nick Lake is Adler Planetarium's manager of theater experience and presentation. He's been introducing people to the wonders of the night sky since 2004 in the planetarium's domed theaters. The real night sky can be less reliable, especially as you get further south.
The northern lights are visible occasionally from sort of the Great Lakes latitudes. I've seen them several times from just about halfway up the midpoint of the lower peninsula of Michigan, so just north of Muskegon. With nighttime landscape photography, you can allow the lens to drink in more and more light and add in this sort of canvas of light on the picture. And it really, it will add more than you can see with the naked eye, which some people say, well, it's, you know, that's not really what it looks like, but it is in fact real. It's what is actually up there in the sky.
One obstacle in seeing or photographing the night sky is light pollution.
Keep in mind that your night sky cameras now are much more sensitive than your eyes, so they're really going to pick up any kind of light pollution that's around. If you're in Detroit, you just need to get out of Detroit because it's just going to be too bright and you won't be impacted by cities further north where you really have a shot at looking at a nice dark sky. Same with Chicago, Milwaukee.
Another source of troublesome light, the moon. If it's too bright, it can obscure other celestial bodies.
When you get past the quarter moon, the half moon, then you start to lose the darkness of the sky. So you do have to pay attention to that.
Satellites are yet another concern. They've been orbiting above for decades, but they're becoming more numerous.
Last February, I'm sure you've heard of SpaceX. They started launching their Starlink satellite constellation. The goal was to do every 2 weeks have a launch of 60 satellites to eventually have thousands and thousands of satellites into this mega constellation that is encircling Earth. And I made it a point to follow the data on the satellite launches and try to track these things and document it. And it really gives a good look at how intrusive these satellite trains are to the night sky. And the astronomers are just going nuts about it. So yes, it's very difficult to do a time lapse now of, let's say, a 2 or 3 hour shot with the Milky Way going through the frame. with just not being able to watch it because it's so jarring from all the satellites flying through the scene. And it's very disturbing to the point that we don't even know if we can continue with the night sky stuff because it's just going to be so busy with these trains of satellites.
In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic meant Nick Lake had to change the way he talked to the public about the night sky.
When Adler closed to the public in middle of March, I was suddenly thrust into a place where I didn't have domed theaters to present content, and I was itching for a way to continue to communicate with the public about the wonders of the sky, what they could see, and to inspire them to get out there and look up for themselves.
Nick now hosts the planetarium's video series, Skywatch Weekly.
Hey Stargazers, welcome back. Skywatch Weekly is a 5 to 10 minute weekly video series that we started at the middle part of April. Most of what we talk about is really visible from the Northern Hemisphere, specifically the mid-northern latitudes, so the entire Great Lakes region. We're trying to keep it accessible to all audiences. There really is no substitute for being out and seeing these things for yourself in the sky. We hope to inspire people to do that, kind of give examples of what you might see if you know where to look and when to look, kind of bringing the wonders of space to you and then helping you realize that it's right outside your front door. You can go out there and see a lot of it for yourself. We really encourage people to start with the moon. It's sort of the easiest, the most obvious thing to see up there. So I think our moon, as big and as bright as it is, it really allows the imagination to work and hopefully inspires people to get out there and see more.
We can really get caught up in the screens of phones and computers. So it's really nice to just unplug, calm down, and just take a walk or just observe what nature has to offer. I think it's really important for people to not forget that.
I think through the time of COVID, which we're still in and we'll be in for a while, it's been important to find ways where we can still be united and not just separated and socially distanced. And the sky is a great way to do that, and especially the moon. If the moon is full, it's full for everyone. Everyone that night from a dark sky on planet Earth will see a full moon in whatever phase it might happen to be. So I think it does lend a sense of unity, a sense of the same sky that we're looking up at.
In the summer of 2019, we aired a story on the Indiana Dunes, which had just become the newest U.S. national park. Just like all of us, parks in the U.S. and Canada faced challenges in 2020. Here's our original story, followed by an update on what the past year has meant for parks on both sides of the Great Lakes.
The Indiana Dunes have been a national lakeshore since 1966, but they only became a national park on February 15, 2019. So what's in a name? A national park doesn't receive more funding than a national lakeshore, but it's seen as a major upgrade.
We didn't really realize how important it was going to be to the public. The higher profile, the number of people who are coming here. Literally the day that the change happened, we started getting emails and phone calls from all over the country saying, "We hear you're a national park, we're going to come visit."
While there are 419 sites in the national park system, it's the 61 national parks that get the attention and the visitors, like this couple from South Carolina.
We probably would not have come to the Indiana Dunes National Park if it wasn't a national park.
I would just say it's a bucket list type thing.
The park stretches from east of Gary to Michigan City, Indiana. And within that stretch, there's the Port of Indiana, bustling with industry, Indiana Dunes State Park, and several beach towns. At 15,000 acres, it's less than 1% of the size of Yellowstone, but it's 15 miles of beach, 50 miles of trails, and unparalleled views are all within a 2-hour drive of millions of potential visitors.
A lot of folks come just for the beach and they have no idea what's back here.
Further from the lakefront, national park status protects dunes, bogs, and wooded areas, but there are still threats. A growing number of researchers, park staff, and volunteers are working to better understand the threats and how to lessen them. The park has a citizen science program where anyone can volunteer to help with certain ongoing research programs. These volunteers are collecting dragonfly larvae to test for changes in mercury levels.
It's a wonderful opportunity for people to get involved with scientific research, and it's great for the researchers too, because when they use the help of volunteers, they can collect a lot more data than they would normally be able to collect if they were doing it on their own or just with a couple graduate students.
Water levels are another concern because they have changed dramatically. The Army Corps of Engineers says Lake Michigan rose 6 inches from May to June, to an inch short of the historic June high. And high water causes erosion. Erosion damaged one of the park's 8 beaches. The National Parks Conservation Association says erosion claimed 30 feet of beach and parts of access trails at Portage Lakefront and Riverwalk on the park's east side. And on the east end, at the dune known as Mount Baldy, visitors discover how damage to the 123-foot attraction was created by nature and humans alike.
Feel the wind. What do you think that wind's doing?
Visitors running down the dune destroyed plants that held the sand in place. With the plants gone, the dune began to move and covered up oak trees.
From the inside out, they decompose, and now they have hollow chambers in them.
The underground hollows make the dune unstable, and public access is restricted on Mount Baldy. The park is now trying to preserve and even restore the dune by planting native vegetation like marram grass to stabilize the sand.
Our primary mission in the Park Service, and of course here at Indiana Dunes, is resource preservation, so that these resources are here for future generations. We want the public to come in, but if we don't take care of this, there's nothing for them to see.
Parkgoers that are often awestruck at the sight of the dunes.
I think that the response to first seeing the dunes is, whoa, because they're huge. And you're like, that's not what it should be like. This shouldn't be both the desert and the ocean, but it's not the ocean or the desert, so killing it.
Great Lakes Now News Director Natasha Blakely and Toronto-based contributor Sharon Oosthoek checked in with U.S. and Canadian parks to bring us this update. One thing the pandemic produced? More visitors.
Many entertainment options have been closed to people, and as a result, a lot of people have been turning to outdoor recreation instead to find an outlet. And that's really shown in the visitor numbers at national parks all over the country, but especially around the Great Lakes area. And parks that are more easily accessible, like Indiana Dunes National Park or Cuyahoga Valley National Park, there's been a visible spike in the number of people there. Indiana Dunes National Park had a notable increase in visitors from Illinois specifically when Chicago had its beaches closed. And in parks that aren't so COVID friendly, where you might have to get there by boat or plane, like Isle Royale or Apostle Islands, they didn't see that same spike. Isle Royale even had its ferry closed for the entire year.
Here in Canada, many of our parks were closed early in the pandemic. But when they started reopening in a staggered fashion starting June 1st or so, they were really popular. People were flocking to them. I know in Ontario, the Ontario parks around the Great Lakes saw a 7% increase in their car camping bookings. And this was despite the fact that in each park they reserved some campsites for social distancing, meaning they weren't allowing booking on these sites at all. So you would go into these parks and you would find, nobody next to you and nobody across from you, for instance. And yet they still had a 7% increase. They also saw a 29% increase in backcountry camping. And these are sites that you can't drive into. You have to canoe or backpack into. So it's not surprising they saw such a huge jump in these sites because they're quite remote and it's really easy to social distance out there.
The parks are all still dealing with high water and erosion issues. And when you have increased visitors coming to see the various attractions and use the resources at the parks, but you end up having to close popular beaches or popular trails because of high water, that's just kind of a struggle for them to deal with.
Yeah, on the Canadian side, the parks that saw the most problems with high water and erosion were those on Lakes Erie and Lake Huron. They saw shrinking beaches due to the high water levels. When I was up on the Bruce Peninsula on the weekend, I was standing out on what used to be like a 50-foot stretch of sand. It's now underwater. And on the Georgian Bay side, I know that they had to close some trails because they were washed out. And also, I was talking to park staff yesterday and they said that Wheatley Provincial Park, Craigleith, and Owanda Provincial Park all had significant reductions in their day use areas because their beaches were just, swamped, which meant they had to reduce the number of visitors. They actually had to turn people away. Well, up at Bruce Peninsula National Park, there were huge lineups all summer. My neighbors were turned away, I know, several times. But the August long weekend, they were utterly overrun. Park staff told me they had to turn away 2,000 vehicles. And you could see them lining Highway 6 up and down on the way to the park. That was in part because of the eroded beaches, yes, and in part just because it was so popular. People just wanted to get out there.
That's our show for now. Thanks for watching. For more on these stories and the Great Lakes in general, visit greatlakesnow.org. When you get there, you can follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to get updates about our work. See you out on the lakes.
This program is brought to you by the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Lori and Tim Wadhams.
The Consumers Energy Foundation is committed to serving Michigan, from preserving our state's natural resources and sustaining our future, to continuing business growth, academic achievement, and community involvement. Learn more at consumersenergy.com/foundation.
The Richard C. Devereaux Foundation for Energy and Environmental Programs at DPTV, the Polk Family Fund, Eve and Jerry Young, the Americana Foundation, the Brookby Foundation, Founders Brewing Company, and viewers like you. Thank you.